Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. Emeritus Professor Andrew Cowan was for 10 years the director of the creative writing programme at University of East Anglia, where he taught for 20 years on the MA in creative writing. He's the author of the best-selling guidebook, The Art of Writing Fiction, recently reissued in an updated second edition, and the monograph Against Creative Writing. His first novel, Pig, was the winner of the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award, a Betty Trask Award, the Authors Club First Novel Award, a Scottish Arts Council Book Award, and the Ruth Haddon Memorial Prize, and was shortlisted for 5 other awards. He has since published 5 other novels: Common Ground, Crustaceans, What I Know, Worthless Men, and, more recently, Your Fault. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Rachel.
I met your name before I met you, and I don't think I'd quite worked out that writers were, in fact, everybody was a human being, but I had The Art of Writing Fiction with me all the time. So before we actually met, I feel like you have been part of the journey in the nicest possible way for quite a while.
That is nice.
I remember when we were emailing, you said you're currently writing, and you said a non-fiction book on writing, pottery, creativity, block, perfectionism and teaching. And you didn't use the word memoir, but I'm seeing the ingredients of a life and career.
Yeah, it's memoirish. It's written as a series of very short chapters. So each chapter is a vignette. And because I'm writing about pottery, I'm thinking about the vignettes as analogous to pottery vessels. So each of these vessels contains one idea. So although often that idea will be couched within a remembered scene, something memoirish, quite often it's referring to my reading, to theories about creativity, theories about block, about perfectionism, about pottery, and how pottery or craft differs from art. So it's a kind of cornucopia. It's full of stuff, everything that makes up the inside of this vessel. And I'm trying to get it down on the page as a series of vessels which resemble pots, but might also be thought of as fragments of pots. And if you reassemble the fragments through the reading of the book, then you make a very large vessel containing everything I know.
Am I right that you discovered pottery or got more into pottery as you were leaving UEA, retiring from UEA, or was that?
No.
Because I read something about, I don't know if that became the next big project or.
Yeah. So when I retired from UEA, I took early retirement 2 years ago, and I insist on the early retirements that you don't think.
We will put
as
early
old as I actually am
in capitals.
And I thought, finally, I can dedicate myself to the thing I've always believed I'm most suited to. So I've made a career as a writer and a teacher of writing, and yet I've always felt fraudulent in both of those capacities, because I've grown up since very, very young thinking that I'm actually a potter, and I'm a frustrated potter. So I never actually pursued it to the point where it became a reality. It always existed as a pipe dream, which is a very safe space for it. So I could always tell myself when I was writing and struggling with writing, well, that's because I'm really a potter. And so periodically I would join night classes and do pottery. I did pottery at school to A level, and then I went to art school with the intention of becoming a potter, and found that the art school experience wasn't the one I was expecting. It was no kind of apprenticeship in ceramics, and I dropped out. I lost heart and I dropped out, and I drifted a bit, and then I drifted into English literature at university because my former English teacher grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and pushed me through the door and said, do English. So I did English and pined for pottery. And so all these years that I've been writing, I've been periodically doing pottery and then stopping and starting again. But that's also the story of my writing career, is stopping and starting again. And I've always found writing particularly difficult. And the key thing for me was discovering that pottery, ceramics, making things in clay was a very effective antidote to the difficulty of writing. So writing is abstract. Obviously, it's linguistic. You're sitting still. All your energy is clenched. You're staring at a screen, formally staring at a piece of paper in a typewriter. and there's nowhere for your energy to go except into the writing. And if you feel blocked as a writer, all of that energy gets backed up and you become very frustrated. And I found that through pottery, I could let out some of the energy. Pottery's haptic. It's about touch and smell and the line. It's about the eye. It's a completely different way of relating to one's own creativity.
It's so interesting hearing you say about those two aspects in a way working together, because I was listening to you talking about your experience of being blocked and how realizing that there was the adult critic, that there was the artist child, and allowing the artist child to not be the critic, to not push, but let the stuff out. And then the critic could do a more meaningful job when it's time for that to happen. And I'm interested in how it's not a duality, it's two aspects of exactly the same thing, but those different aspects and finding a way to allow them to work together, I think has been certainly very important for me with writing. And when I'm writing coaching, I think there's something very significant in when a person gets to a point where they're no longer going, I have to push some of my life away, or I have to put on my grown-up face or my vocabulary. It is about finding what is already in there and allowing that to happen. I think, and this is more speaking as a dyspraxic than anything else, I find it difficult to relate that to pottery simply because for me, when I'm writing, I can do that. I can go, bleh, because I am a fan of the vomit draft idea, and I can clear it up later. I can make it more what it was. With pottery, this might, and I am dyspraxic, this might be a lot more about this, but you need to be quite in the moment with it, don't you? Because it's moving, it's drying, time is passing in a way not controlled by the author, which to me feels very different.
My potting goes back to an earliest memory, which is digging a hole in the mud outside the back of our house and shaping it so that it was like the inside of a car and making a kind of disc out of this clayey mud, which became my steering wheel. And so this is when I was really quite young. It's that feeling of being able to fashion things out of this material in a way that's immediate, but is also quite messy. Pottery is extremely messy, and my practice as a writer is extremely tidy. And so it's in that way that pottery works for me as an antidote, but also a way of going back to the child. The idea of the writer as two people, as the adult critic and the child artist, is really meaningful to me because it took me a very long time to come to a realization about that. And so I've always been a perfectionist as a writer in a way that I haven't been as a potter. Potter is freeing. I can make mistakes and correct them immediately. And it doesn't really matter because I feel at home in the clay, with the clay, in the mud. I feel at home there. I've never felt at home in language. Language has always felt like whenever I go there, I'm trespassing.
Can I stay with that for a moment? Because I think having the fact that it is an emotional response, that I have reacted in the opposite direction to that, is important in itself, isn't it? That as writers, a lot of the blocks are about, am I doing it wrong? And the answer is no, you're still looking for how to do it like you, how to look for that permission. And I'm guessing, given that you've had this amazing time at UEA and you're doing this as a potter, all of this, you're seeing people learn and you're seeing how people learn and how people block themselves. Have you found that, I don't want to put myself into this, but I've certainly felt that coaching is me understanding me more, teaching is learning. Has it been like that for you?
That teaching is learning.
That seeing how other people do what they do.
It's interesting about teaching. I've read in places that one learns as much from one's students as they learn from their teacher. That wasn't my experience, to be honest. I did feel for most of the time that I was teaching, which was a long time, that the energy was going largely in one direction, that I was giving myself to my students, everything I knew. Quite a lot of my creative energy was being invested in their work and trying very, very hard to understand the nature of their ambitions and meet them on the ground of their ambitions and try and get inside their writing and intuit where they wanted their writing to go. It's a tiring activity, a strenuous activity. It's quite depleting. And it did mean that I didn't do very much writing because so much of my creative energy, my imaginative capacity was being invested in my students. Some of those students at the higher level, particularly PhD students, in conversation would seed ideas that were very useful to me. And the conversation that one can have with quite an advanced student who's very far on in their practice as a writer and very smart as a thinker and could very easily sit in my chair and do my job. The conversation with those students was actually very useful to me, but most of my teaching wasn't with those students. And so I've often felt that my teaching career, which was quite successful, was at the expense of my writing career. That I had to neglect my writing in order to be an effective teacher.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the differences in models that, I mean, it's a very, very different situation. But when I created the Writers' Gym, it was all about understanding that, you know, you can't pay your money in January and not turn up till July and wonder why your life hasn't changed, as people very often do with the physical gym. It's about bringing those habits into the everyday. And I've found that having, and I in speech marks having, because I love doing it, I love being there, but having to be in a writing space means that I am, I guess, modeling the behavior, sort of turning up as a PT, the way again that the way you do at the physical gym. And I have brought that into universities, but I guess we're coming from very different traditions, aren't we? I think as with the sponsored write, when I wanted to raise money for Macmillan Cancer Support, that was how I started all of this. And I am never in a million years going to swim, run, do any of the things that other people were doing. So I was just sort of sitting in a cafe one day and thought, sponsored write. And it was one of those times that it felt like an idea that sometimes, you know, the idea needs to be in the world. And it was just a case of, oh, right, okay, then I will follow you. And it was the best kind of selfish in that it was another reason that I needed to write. It was a reason to have to write. And I was in my mid-20s and I didn't really know very many people. So it was a way of making me realize that I think what I'm getting at is that we all need to find our own permission for things and that we do that in different ways. But what I hope I'm doing and what I think you're doing is helping people find their own permission.
Yeah, quite a lot of what I was doing was giving permission to fail, giving permission to try again, giving permission to feel like an imposter. I think the most productive, I find workshops where a community of writers gathers and they are constructively critical of each other. They're very helpful of each other. They invest in each other's endeavors. I find the energy in a workshop inspiring and fulfilling. And that's what kept me teaching for 20 years. It was the weekly workshop. I loved that space. But I think most of the most valuable work from the students' point of view happened in one-to-one tutorials, which is where they were able to be more vulnerable than they could be in a group situation and admit to feeling like imposters, like frauds, admit to not knowing what they were doing, admit to all the feelings of uncertainty and misgiving about the project they were engaged upon. And quite a lot of what I was doing in those one-to-one tutorials was not simply or just encouraging them to crack on, you're doing really well, but also giving them permission to feel all those feelings, which I think are part and parcel of the creative process. I used to say to students that the very fact that you doubt yourself is probably the guarantee of your authenticity, because a genuine writer constantly doubts himself. If they don't, the work won't improve. They'll never improve that sentence because they'll just be happy with that sentence. They'll never improve that story because they'll be happy with it. If you're always a little bit uncertain, unhappy, that's the driver for improving it. And that's why writing can feel a little bit arduous, a little bit hard, because the achievement never quite matches the ambition. And it's that little gap that keeps us going. We're going to make it a little bit better and a little bit better. And often in tutorials, I was helping the students come to terms with that gap, that it's not actually an unproductive gap. It's actually very valuable to you.
And it's no kind of failure if when you've finished, there is still the gap between the perfectly realised thing in your head and the thing you've been able to do. All we can ever do is narrow that gap.
Yeah, at some point you have to accept the gap is unbridgeable. You've gone as far as you can, and now you just have to let go. You can never achieve perfection. Perfectionism's a scourge.
And one that I really enjoyed you talking about I heard a recording on the Royal Literary Fund website when you were talking about, enjoyed is the wrong word in context because it's a very difficult subject, and it was the loss of a child. And you were talking about the sensation of consciously or otherwise trying to or needing to compensate your reader with elegant crystalline prose, and realizing in the process of doing that that's not what we're doing. And I found that a really helpful example of something that I talk about with people and talk to about myself a lot, which is the more we can spot the perfectionism, the more we realize the perfectionism does tend to come in when you really do care about something. The more you care about it, the bigger and more real that obstacle is going to feel psychologically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing about the loss of the child, my third book was called Crustaceans, and it was about a child who dies. And because I was very conscious of that being a subject that readers might not want to engage with, and because the child was imagined, by the way, but became very real in my imagination. It was like that was my child. And in order to honor that child, I wanted the book to be a perfect memorial. And because I was conscious that people might not want to read about that subject matter, I wanted the book to reward them in other ways by being beautifully written. It had to be the perfect book. And there's a whole load of personal history and personal psychological history building up to this moment that when I come to write my third novel, that resulted in it getting completely stuck. I became totally blocked in the writing of that book because I was pursuing a method which had been helpful for me in my previous two books, which had been successful. So my perfectionism had been vindicated with my previous two books. But there came a point in the writing of my third book where it wasn't vindicating me. It was becoming quite a vindictive, self-punishing procedure. And I ground to a halt and became very depressed. I couldn't work out at that point in my life whether I was blocked because I was depressed or I was depressed because I was blocked, but the two fed off of each other. And the problem was that I would sit down every day and I would type into a computer what I hoped would be a perfect sentence. And if it wasn't a perfect sentence, I would spend all day stuck there trying to make it perfect. And the energy was backing up, but also the book was stuck in here. And what saved me was that idea of the artist child and the adult critic. It was reading the book from which that idea came. It's over here.
Dorothea Brand, right?
So Dorothea Brand, I read Becoming a Writer, which was written in the 1930s. And it's like the original How to Write book. It's the originator of that genre. And my book, The Art of Writing Fiction, is in that genre eventually. Dorothea Brand, my copy of it, has got a foreword by Malcolm Bradbury, who taught me at UVA. And he remarks that it was written in Freudian time. And Dorothea Brand's big idea is very much a Freudian one. And it's the idea that the individual is made up of the artist child and the adult critic. And the adult critic has to allow the child to play. So she suggests that we dedicate our mornings, let's say, to just splurging, just getting it out there, playing with words, playing with possibilities, and not being in any way critical or judgmental of what we produce. And then in the afternoons, we can invite the adult critic into the room to work with that material. It needn't be divided in that way across the stretch of a day. It could be that one spends 3 months splurging and 3 months editing.
A non-literal morning.
Yes, a non-literal morning. I actually made it into a non-literal morning. I did, however, dedicate myself to getting up earlier and cracking on with it in the mornings. And so the first thing I did was give myself 14 headings names of characters, names of locations, names of most significant events. And I used those 14 headings to give me a starter for each morning for a fortnight. And I'd sit down, and so the protagonist, the narrator, is called Paul. And so heading Paul, and I just wrote as much about Paul as I possibly could. I let all of that stuff that's in there come out finally, and didn't read it, just put it over there. And the rules were that I mustn't stop. I had to keep going. I mustn't punctuate, pause for punctuation or spelling errors or whatever. I mustn't self-correct. I mustn't read back what I've done. If I got stuck, I just had to rewrite what I'd just written until I started again. Keep going. Splurge. And I put all this splurge to one side. And after 14 mornings, which became long mornings, they stretched on into the afternoon, I had enough material to make a book. It'd all been in here all this time, and I'd got it out finally. And so I wrote another 14 headings, and I had 28 days of splurge. And then I allowed myself a degree of, or I allowed the perfectionist in me, a degree of license to work with it. So for the next several months, I worked on that splurgy material and shaped it. And it was so much less arduous because I had something to go on other than the blank page, because I was engaging daily with mud, with mess. It was like potting. And actually the protagonist in the book is a potter. And it worked. It got me out of a hole, and it was very helpful for my mental well-being. I started to get better. And that became my method subsequently. Ever since, that's what I do. If I'm going to start a book, I begin by giving myself some headings, and I just splurge it onto the page. Very often these days, it will literally be the mornings dedicated to splurge, the afternoon dedicated to editing. But that's my process, and it has to be that way. Otherwise, it gets all jammed up in the mill of my perfectionism, which is a painful place to be.
Yeah, it's not where we want to go and work, that mill. It's where we want to completely hand in our notice and get out. But it comes back again and again in so many ways, doesn't it? I was thinking about, and I hadn't actually consciously realised this, but the Dorothea Brand idea and founding the genre in that way. I can't remember if Margaret Atwood actually mentions it. Probably she does, but the original title of what is now Margaret Atwood on Writing or on Writers and Writing was Negotiating with the Dead. And It was that idea of by the time you write anything, you're not the same person who wrote it, and how there's always that duality. I find it so interesting to come back to this because in a lot of the one-to-one coaching sessions, I don't know if you found that this is similar at the university, is people are very often, when they are in a state of anxiety or depression about their writing, or just plain old not knowing what's going on, trying to resolve the duality of, I feel like this, but I need to do that, or I don't know if I'm worthy of it, or I don't know what's the right idea. And they're trying to do it all in here. And that relationship between critic, adult, artist, child, giving them both space. You know, what it doesn't do is it doesn't come down on one side or another. It allows the aspects to be in dialogue, no pun intended. It is a conversation.
It's an endless conversation. I don't think it's ever resolved either.
Yeah. And that's not the goal, is it?
No, you have to allow it to happen. Yeah, I think also a writing program is a process of, well, you have to write very quickly to meet deadlines, you know, for the next workshop, for the next assessment point. So I think for many students coming onto a program, it may be the first time where they've had to work to such a rigid schedule. And that means that often what they're submitting into the public sphere, into the realm of the workshop and the conversation that spills out of the workshop and the tutorials, often what they're submitting is not as perfect as they would like it to be. And they're then having to make themselves available for the conversation about it. So other people are coming in with their feedback, their perspectives. But I think that also encourages the writer to take a kind of objective perspective on their own work. And so a program does sort of encourage or enforce that conversation, that dialogue in the person as well as the person in the context of others. And it's possibly the thing that's most valuable that the student will take away is learning how to be productively or constructively in a conversation with themselves.
And not being squeamish about talking it out, thinking it out loud. Not being squeamish about letting it out that the dialogue isn't in here, it is out here.
Yeah.
Although I realise it's extremely, selective. They've got their own merit, but a lot of people, as well as writing novels, will potentially, if they wish to be writing journalism, writing articles, there's a lot of other things where that life skill and that lack of squeamishness about getting something out and being able to improve it rapidly in the world. That's a big life skill, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I have worked at UEA with colleagues whose background is not in academia. I mean, my background wasn't in academia, but colleagues who have worked in the journalistic field, for instance, where they have had to develop quite thick skins because they're producing work in a hurry to a deadline and then having to submit it to an editor who is under extreme pressure to get that out there quickly and will come back with often quite brutal feedback. And so I've learned from colleagues to be a little bit more forgiving of first drafts, my own and other people's, because they're just first drafts. They're places from which you can set out.
So I would argue then that is an example of other people's journeys making one's own roadmap clearer. If you're being more forgiving of your first drafts through being more forgiving of other people's.
Yes, that's learning more from my colleagues, I have to say.
Because everybody's doing this, or everybody's doing their best to do this while telling themselves that they're an imposter. We're all there.
Do you know that about imposter syndrome? I discovered this in the writing of this book I've been doing, the one about pottery. Well, it's about pottery and writing and teaching and all sorts of things. And I learned that the phrase imposter syndrome came from two psychologists in the late 80s who were specifically examining women in higher education and the professions and the way in which they self-sabotaged, because they very often felt that they were imposters in that context. So the phrase comes from there, and it specifically relates to women in largely or predominantly male environments.
Yeah, it's worth holding on to that, isn't it? Because, I mean, one of the things that I ask people to do is make sure that they write down the things people liked, the things people were touched by and moved by and interested in and so on, because otherwise your brain deletes all of that stuff and repeats to you at 3 a.m. the other stuff, which may be really useful other stuff and may be absolutely true and necessary. But for evolutionary reasons, the brain's like, we don't need the good stuff. We can sit over here and look at this forever. I do certainly feel that studying writing, but particularly studying coaching, just what I have become aware of myself in the context of other people, I think I have a more peaceful, might be an exaggeration, but there is more clarity in the mental landscape of what it is that we're all part of and doing, and how we self-sabotage has been a really good thing. And on that note, would you like to either champion or recommend habits or exercises that have worked for you? Because we've talked quite a bit about perfectionism and imposter syndrome, and this stuff happens. This is big stuff. Either about those or anything else. Is there anything that you would champion for writers out there?
Yeah, one thing I've come to champion lately, I've become almost an evangelist for it, is an online writing group that I join every morning. So for the 2 years since I left UEA, almost without fail, apart from holidays, I get up for an 8 a.m. start, and we write to the clock. So everybody is tapping away or handwriting away, or staring out the window for precisely 50 minutes. Part of the reason I'm an evangelist for this is because it's such a massive surprise to me to find myself in anyone's sacred space doing that, writing in the company of others. I'm quite reclusive. I'd almost describe myself as antisocial. And yet there I am. I'm sitting with all these other people and we're just getting on with it. And it's so strangely productive. And this book that I've been writing has been written because of the stimulus every morning of that hour.
Well, in the spirit of absolute bias, the Writer's Gym does that every day as well. So if anybody wants to do both, I know some of them come to us. So Absolutely. It's really nice to have those spaces and for them to be spread out over the course of a day. Some of ours are a silent space with a chat beforehand, a chat afterwards, which is moderated, shaped. There's coaching available in the chat box throughout, but there's also staring into space, looking at other people's cats and living rooms and bookshelves on Zoom, which is an important part of anyone's process.
Yes.
And yeah, I think what does speak out to me in that is how, lockdown wasn't the greatest thing for a lot of reasons, but one thing I personally got out of it was I very much made my physical and mental space my own. And that was when the writing room, which we start every week with, started at the writer's gym. And the people who feel like this is not for them, the people who are most surprised when they find it is, those are the people it's absolutely for. And we are seeing more and more of that it's not a case of alone needing to look like alone. Nobody takes the alone away from us by realizing that everybody's there. The most touching thing I heard yesterday when we did our coffee and creativity session was somebody logged in late. Not that there is a late, you can turn up whenever you want to, but she logged in late when we'd all started, and she looked around at all the faces and said in the chat box, "I'm already so glad I joined." And that is something that building that coaching community and knowing that every face I see there represents books, flash fiction, every conceivable form of writing and every conceivable stage of writing. And that you as an emeritus professor and a couple of people I've met recently who are just now coming to writing, everybody benefits from that. And it is so right that we model that.
It's a useful way of giving structure to a day as well. It starts me off. So, it's 8 a.m. non-negotiable. It's 8 a.m. You get up and you sit down at your desk and you stay there for precisely 1 hour. And after that, there's a kind of momentum and I can keep going. But previously I would have kind of got up when I was ready and wandered around the house and gone out to the pottery studio and emptied a bin and,
I love using the comparison with emptying bins. And I realise time is getting on a bit, but I must just say, hearing you say emptying the bin, I've said to a couple of people who come through the writing sprints or come through the mornings or afternoons, as for the reasons you're describing, that it can be easy to think I'm not in the mood, so I can't do it. No one's ever said that. No one's ever thought, I won't take the bins out because I'm worried I'm not going to do it as well as I possibly could, or my friend might do it differently, or somebody else might be better at doing it, or when so-and-so was my age, they were so much better about taking out the bins. We do it about writing because we are so involved with it, because we care about it so much, and the perfectionism gets so much louder as a result. But this is why you turning up to that and, everybody showing up for these things, it's such important modelling that this is for everybody. But it's been such a pleasure. If you feel like it's too early for me to say roughly when do we think this is coming out, or the new non-fiction?
Oh, God, I don't know. I mean, one of the things we could speak about, and I think shouldn't speak about, is the difference between writing and getting published. It's getting increasingly difficult to find an agent, to find a publisher for beginner writers. And for people who are at my point in their career, it's almost equally difficult. So I write in trepidation. Whether it'll be published, I've no idea.
Well, I'm going to keep an eye on it. And if other people would like to keep an eye on what you're doing, is the website the best place to find you?
I do have a website.
You haven't updated it since 2023, I noticed. I know you've been doing stuff.
I barely go there. I can't face it. Yeah, there it is. No, that'll tell you nothing. It'll tell you about whatever I once did. No, my Instagram. Go to my Instagram and then you can look at my pots. I post pictures of my pots on Instagram. And currently what I'm doing is everything I make, the book I'm writing is about the gift economy of art in a nutshell. And I'm literalizing that by making pots to give to people, not to sell. And lately I've been making little mugs to give to friends who've published a book. And I put the title of the book on the mug. And then I post them with a picture of the book on my Insta.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. I'd had a look at some of the pots. I hadn't actually seen that. So I'll go and look on Instagram. Could you just say your Instagram and potentially your website out loud?
Andrew Cowan, one word, lowercase, 01.
Fabulous. So Instagram is first port of call. And We look forward to hearing very, very much more about all of those wonderful things: writing, pottery, creativity, block perfectionism, teaching, all the good stuff. For now, Andrew Cowan, thank you very much for joining the Writers' Gym.
Well, thank you.
You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr. Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London, as a guest or as a member, visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.